Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Jonathan Schoss. I'm a superintendent of education with the Halton District School Board. We would like to welcome everybody this evening to our public consultation meeting live stream for Oakville number 3 and number 5 boundary study. We're going to begin our evening with the land acknowledgement. We do this for all of our meetings. And so I will ask you to follow along on the slide as I read. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations in the Métis, from the Anishinaabe to the Ottawandaron, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis. These lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. And it's my pleasure this evening to introduce our director, Mr. Curtis Ennis.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Good evening, everyone, and welcome. We are so excited that you're able to join us for this public consultation for the boundary review. And we are looking forward to having a lively discussion, a fulsome discussion, one that honors different points of view. We know that these decisions are never easy. And we know that at the end of the day, we're going to try to find consensus and try to build a better pathway for all of our students. So we ask that you keep an open mind, that you have an open heart, and that you listen, and that we come to a good decision that will serve the board well for years to come. I want to acknowledge our trustees that are here and for the great work that they have done. I want to recognize trustees Amos, Rocha, Oliver, Collard, Baxter, and any others that may be on the line. I want to thank you, thank the staff. I want to thank Fred and his team and all the senior staff that are represented here tonight. Thank you for the great work. I want to thank all the parents. Thank you for the work that you have done, for the input that you have given, for the voices you have raised, for the concerns that you have brought forward. We look forward to hearing more tonight, and I trust that at the end of tonight, we will land in a good place. So I wish you a wonderful meeting, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Director Ennis. It's my pleasure now to introduce the trustees. You'll see their images and titles on the screen. Trustee Kelly Amos, Trustee Tanya Rocha, Trustee Carol Baxter, Trustee Joanna Oliver, and our out-of-area trustee, Trustee Amy Collard. I'll turn it over to Trustee Amos for some opening comments.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Schoss. Welcome, everyone. We're really glad that you can be here with us tonight, and look forward. I'm sure you're looking forward to seeing what the committee has come up with in the way of options to try and solve some of our concerns in our communities. We have schools that are too full, schools that aren't quite full enough, and we wanted to make sure that all schools are going to be the best they can be, and we want to make sure that all students are served as well as they can be. So that is what this is. The final outcome of this is about what's doing best for all the students. So thank you firstly to the volunteers from the schools who came together to help us to develop some scenarios for you to look at tonight. I'd also like to say a very big thank you to the Halton District School Board staff, Manager Thebo, and the planning staff who have worked so hard and prepared all the scenarios that have been asked for. And if you're interested in looking at past scenarios, they are on the in the website. But they have done a lot of work to get to where we are tonight. So thank you very much for all that. I know some of you have been providing your input to myself and to other trustees and to the planning staff. And thank you. We have heard your voices and we have been sharing that at the meetings. And we ask that you continue to do that and provide your input tonight after you've seen the different scenarios. So we're all here to try and do it best we can for the community and the students. So thank you very much for coming out, and we look forward to your input.
Thank you, Trustee Amos. And I'm going to ask Trustee Rocha now for some opening comments as well.
Thank you, Jonathan. First off, I echo Kelly's sentiments, and I thank her for acknowledging everyone who has participated in this process. As Kelly will be the trustee for Northeast number 5, and I'll be the trustee for Northeast number 3. It's a very happy day for us that we get to bring 2 new schools to Oakville, and it is with that in mind that we are here today, and it shows that we are one step closer to opening the doors to 2 much needed schools in the areas north of Dundas. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Trustee Rocha. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to General Manager Fred Thibault to carry us through the rest of the evening. Over to you, sir.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thanks for those introductions and thank yous. And again, I just want to echo that same thing with all of our trustees, senior team, as well as our parent reps in joining us in this process. And we'll be going through this tonight just so that we can provide that information to you and bring you up to speed as to where we've come thus far. So the first part of the presentation really is going to be an overview of all the information of what the boundary review process is, the role of the committee. We're going to go through the top 3 options that we've selected to present to the community tonight, and then we'll be discussing next steps on that front. But before that, before we bring the meeting to a close, what we're going to do is we're going to open the floor to questions and feedback, and we'll explain to you how you'll be able to do that live this evening for those of you that haven't already submitted questions. And then we'll close the night off just by explaining what to expect in the coming months as we go through the last half of this process. So in terms of kicking us off, we just want to again go over what the purpose of this boundary review is. So back in December of 2022, which is almost a year ago today, the board approved a motion for us to initiate a boundary review study for a number of areas within Oakville. And the purpose of this boundary review is to establish new boundaries for the Oakville number 3 and Oakville number 5 schools that are planned over the next couple of years. Now, that said, we did involve a number of other schools because there were a number of these schools were holding students from North Oakville. So we want to involve them in the process, as well as we want to alleviate some of the pressures that we were seeing south of Dundas and some of our existing schools. The other thing, too, we want to also address is the distribution of French immersion, both in the north and the south, and see if we could better distribute enrollment in such a way that created a more stable environment for not only North Oakville, but South Oakville as well. And just to note, too, that as part of this, once approved by the Board of Trustees and once it's been considered, the intent is that portions of this boundary review will be implemented for September 2024, but it will be rolled out over a few years as we open both Oakville number 3 and Oakville number 5. And we'll get into those details later this evening. In terms of the profile of the study area, again, it's comprised of schools north of Dundas, which is primarily where all of the growth is occurring right now in Oakville, or the majority of it, as well as schools south. So we have a total of 9 involved in this process. It's one of our larger boundary reviews we've completed in quite some time. We have Dr. David R. Williams, Falgarwood, Forest Trail, Munns, Udinawi, Palermo, Post Corners, River Oaks, and Sunningdale. And some of these are both English single-track schools, or dual-track English and FI schools, or single-track FI schools. And again, with the purpose of the review to balance overall enrollment, we thought it best to involve all schools so we can look at a better long-term solution for the area. In terms of what's driving a lot of these pressures that we're seeing right now, as I mentioned earlier, North Oakville, depicted in green in this image here, represents the vast majority of the growth that we're seeing in terms of our suburban green field development. This is where all our new schools are located and where a lot of our single family, medium density, and as well as high density homes are being located. But a lot of growth is also being driven by intensification, which is what we're seeing south of Dundas, namely in Post Coroner's boundary and Palermo's boundary, where we are seeing a little bit more intensifying of the existing areas or the completion of some of these areas with more higher density development, which is creating additional pressures that we're trying to address as part of this review. The status of the two new elementary schools that are planned in North Oakville, Oakville 3 and Oakville 5. Just give you a brief update on those. Oakville number 3 at the moment is planned for an opening of September 2025. Unfortunately, we've come across some delays in the construction of the school that inevitably led to a 1-year delay. But it is under construction and it's moving along. So we hope, again, its opening will be in September 2025. Oakville number 5, which is located southwest of Burnham Thorpe and 6th Line. We're planning this opening for September 2026. We don't own the lands yet and we haven't started construction as of yet, but it is funded by the ministry and we are advancing it as quickly as possible so we can open the school quickly alongside the community, which is planned for that area. In terms of where we're at in the process, thus far we've had a number of meetings, both with the Boundary Review Steering Committee, which is made up of trustees and staff, as well as the Boundary Review Committee, which is made up of the steering committee, as well as all of our parent representatives that we'll be introducing later tonight. At this point, we've had 4 meetings collectively with our Boundary Review Committee. And now what we've done is, now where we're at is to present to you the work that we've completed thus far to start collecting some of that feedback. So the intent is that by next week, we'll be able to have that feedback in hand, present it again to the Boundary Review Committee, and then hopefully by January, we'll have an approved boundary that we can disseminate to the community and let you know what's happening, both for the years to come and for student accommodation. We'll get more into this at the end of the presentation. In terms of the communications that we provide to the community thus far, we used a number of different methods this time around. We have our boundary study webpage, which you can access all of the information that's been presented to the Boundary Review Committee thus far. Some meeting minutes, options, videos of those presentations, so you can have the full breadth of what's brought us to this point. We also have our dedicated BRC email where you can provide questions directly to us and we can answer them throughout the process. We've notified all of our community members through the school messenger process, email, so that way you're up to speed on what's happening and when it's happening. And then also we've provided a number of displays at our affected schools just so that parents have a visible notice of what's going to be happening in their area, as well as a QR code as to how to access all the information. So we've tried to hit a number of ways to reach out to our parent communities on what's going to be happening as part of this boundary review process. Now, in terms of our committee, I just want to give a brief overview of what the roles and responsibilities are and who they were. In terms of our Boundary Review Steering Committee, so this is the initial committee that determines the scope of the study, what schools are impacted, and what type of process we're going to be going through. Those are comprised by the affected area superintendents as well as the affected area trustees. So here there are a listing of all of them. We've also brought in unaffected superintendents as well as a trustee from an unaffected area. Amy Collard and Jonathan Schoss were from the unaffected areas. We also had our planning department and a representative from Halton Student Transportation Services to be part of the process too, just to inform the options that we're developing as a committee. Again, I want to send out a large thank you and great appreciation to our parent committee members. So as part of this process, the Boundary Review Committee is comprised of both the steering committee members I mentioned earlier, as well as up to 2 representatives from each school that's impacted by this boundary review process. And all of us met 4 times, as I mentioned earlier, to review the options and discuss the development of unit options as well. And we'll get into that in a second. The roles of the Boundary Review Committee is really to represent all students, not just their impacted area, but also bring in a lot of the flavor or the perspective of that specific school community that's being impacted. So together we can reach good options and good outcomes to make sure that everyone's voice is heard and that we're balancing interests and needs throughout. So, unfortunately, we can't always make everyone happy, but at least that way we're trying to find solutions that best meet the overall goals of the, as described by the parent reps. And really, the point of it is for all of us to work collaboratively to end up with some good options at the end that we can present to the community, and then ultimately present those options to the Board of Trustees for final approval. So with that, I just want to now hand it over to Hiba Rizvi, which is one of our parent representatives from Dr. David R. Williams area. And I'll hand over the floor to her to give us a little bit of perspective of how the process has gone thus far.
Thank you, Fred. Can everyone hear me clearly? Okay. Good evening, parents, our trustees, and board staff. As Fred already mentioned, I'm Hiba Rizvi. I'm a parent rep at Dr. David R. Williams, and I'm here on behalf of our other parent reps to share with you our insight and our perspective on this boundary review. I've been part of this boundary review initially when we were building Udanawi. So it's definitely safe to say this has been a a large boundary review with almost 9 schools, as Fred already mentioned. And some of the things that we were looking at was the overcrowding in schools such as River Oaks, Udanawi, Post Corners, and Dr. David R. Williams. The latter two are currently closed for enrollment, as most of you know, and children are being bused to Palermo. We have 24 portables on site at DDW, and most of the schools, those 4 schools, are either at capacity or close to max capacity. But just as overcrowding has been a concern, undercapacity in schools has also been looked at unfavorably, especially in our FI schools at Sunningdale, Munns, and Forest Trail. Operating at low capacity means that the integrity of the program tends to be questioned, and it creates more split classes, and there's limited access to resources. So given all of that and the level of development that has been taking place north of Dundas, we know that high enrollment is going to be an continued and ongoing concern. So with all that information at hand, we, the parent community, decided on certain parameters that we wanted to identify when we considered the different boundary reviews and how students are going to be effective. And by and large, all of us agreed that the most important piece was that we wanted to minimize the change for students as much as possible so that minimal students are affected by this boundary review. We also wanted to make sure that cohorts and friends were kept together wherever possible, as much possible. We wanted to maintain a walk to school zone for most schools, so busing was limited. We also obviously were looking to reduce enrollment to an ODG, which is just overground capacity level, so that portables could be minimized, especially in the schools in the north. At the same time, we wanted to make sure that there's no school that's under capacity and it's maintaining a certain level of enrollment. Sustainability of programs was also looked at. We wanted to make sure that's maintained in case of FI particularly, where teachers and resources are sufficient. So the question of FI not being possible in the north was really looked at closely. The numbers had to be concrete for that. We also wanted to make sure that these changes that we're looking at are a long-term sustainable plan and not something that requires a boundary review soon enough. So we wanted to delay the boundary review as much as possible. We also wanted to advocate for grandfathering as many students as possible rather than just grade 8. So some of the senior classes could graduate from the current school and alongside their friends. So in order to give all this concrete feedback, the board was able to provide us with current enrollment stats, projected enrollment, taking into account the development and different changes, walking routes and accessibility, as well as boundary changes, how changing a little boundary would affect numbers. So we really do want to thank the staff, I think all of us, because we really pushed them with all our proposals, and we tried to give suggestions, and every time they came back, trying to incorporate all our proposals and options and giving us better suggestions and better options. So I know boundary review isn't fun and it's not an easy process. And our main aim as parents was that we wanted to make sure that the least number of students are affected and there's a stability in the education, especially coming out of COVID. We wanted to make sure that this is as seamless as possible. So we reviewed a lot of options, and due to the parameters I mentioned earlier, some of those options were then tweaked or changed. And as a parent committee, we just tried our best to convey our concerns that the parent community brought forward to us, and hopefully we were able to protect as many interests and needs as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. And again, I just want to echo the amount of work that was done by the parent committees, because as much as they put us to task in developing the options and doing the work, I know it is a lot of work on their end to review and digest all the information that we were sending right back to them. So again, Hiba, I appreciate your work as well as the rest of the committees, and for joining us this evening. All right, so with that, some of this was already discussed, but we'll just go over it again briefly in terms of how we developed these options together. So one of the first objectives that we did as part of a boundary review committee is to review the criteria in how we develop these options and see which ones are most prioritized by the community. And all of them are given, some importance, but what we did hear from the community more so from our parent representatives is that in order of magnitude, student experience was number one. They wanted to balance overall enrollment. They wanted to make sure that we had stable long-term boundaries to avoid constant changes, especially in high growth areas. That's something that we frequently see, is that we're in boundary reviews almost every other year. So we're trying to minimize that reality, as well as making sure that programs are viable and they're sustainably sized. In this case, it's not about being too small. I think it's also about being much too large. So we're trying to balance all these things together. And Hiba kind of went through all the other ones too very well, so I won't reiterate them again. In terms of how we developed these boundaries, the first task that we did as staff, and then relayed this back to our committees, was developing zones for the entire study area. And what we were doing here is dividing these areas into smaller geographic areas that we could move from one school to the next, making sure that they made sense in terms of geography, but also if you're living in the area, it makes sense that this area could move to another. So we're not splitting backyards or streets as much as possible. And these were the moving parts that we had as student enrollment projections for each one of the different zones, and that allowed us to put them together and figure out what the best arrangements for school boundaries would be. So the maps that we'll be showing you as part of the rest of this presentation to display the options, it's pretty much how we're grouping these zones together to create the overall school boundaries. In terms of, I just want to give a quick overview of how to review the options that we're going to be presenting this evening. In terms of the bar charts we'll be providing to you live. In terms of the charts that we're going to be doing for each one of the schools, so you can see what the enrollment projections are for the area. There's two bars to first take note of. The first is the light gray bar on the bottom. This is representative of the school's built capacity, so how large the physical school, the permanent school, is that we can fit in terms of number of students. The red bar represents not only is the total capacity of the site, therefore it's the built school as well as all the portables we could place on that property. So really the rule of thumb here is that if we're going over the gray line, that means that we're getting into the need of portables. If we surpass the red line, it means that we can no longer accommodate students on site and an action is needed, whether it's another boundary review or the opening of a new school or some other initiative. On the bottom here is representative of how many portables we anticipate to have on that site. If the number is green, that means that we're well below our max portable count. If it's yellow, we're getting close to it. If it's red, it means we've surpassed it. So in this case here, because we're yellow, we've hit our max portable capacity of 6. We're red because we're at 8, and that's surpassed the maximum. Now we overlay our bar graph, which is representative of the enrollment of each one of the schools. And again, just to put it all together, this red box here represents an instance where in 2024, we've surpassed our max capacity, therefore we need to take some action. So that's how each one of the schools' bar charts will be presented this evening. In terms of the mapping, again, this is what the collection of the zones will look like. So each map is represented in a few layers. So first is the color of the school's overall catchment area, which is comprised by a number of zones, which are enumerated with letters. And so in this case here, as an example, the red area is representative of the River Oaks English tract boundary. Now, with that, we're going to move into the option review. So first, we're gonna demonstrate to you what the current baseline scenario is. So where enrollment projections are leading into with our current school catchment areas, and we're also going to present to you where the issues are that we had to rectify as part of this review process, and then we'll present the three options afterwards. So in this case here, I'm not going to go into great detail what the current boundaries are, but one thing I do want to note is that River Oaks particularly is one of the holding schools we currently have in North Oakville. And right now, as you can see, somewhat of that horseshoe, it's taking on all of that growth and holding it within its own boundary, as well as this zone here in the Upper Oaks community. So right now, it's holding the vast majority of the growth in North Oakville, as well as Falgarwood, which is doing the same for the area east of Trafalgar. So it's holding all of the growth there. Dr. David R. Williams is also technically a holding school, especially with zones I and J right now, which is the future zone for Oakville 5. So in all of these areas here, we're having the challenge of these holding schools are reaching their capacity and we need to open our new facilities, as well as we're seeing some pressures at post corners, which we'll go into in a second. And it's very similar in terms of the FI program as well. Sunningdale right now is holding all of the students in the north here in this pink horseshoe. And then Munns is also holding the area east of Trafalgar in anticipation of new growth. And Dr. David R. Williams is currently the only dual track FI school in North Oakville holding students. Pardon me. In terms of enrollment projections, we're going to start off with Dr. David R. Williams. And what I can say is that almost immediately, one of the main concerns that we have at this school is that we've already surpassed its max capacity as of last year. We've actually came close to it this year as well. The site currently has 24 portables, and it's anticipated to continue to grow as it has all the growth, especially as it's holding the new development area for Oakville number 5. So this is one of the triggers that's requiring us to implement a new boundary so that we can reduce that pressure. It's also worthy to note, too, that right now, Dr. David R. Williams is currently under a redirection. So any new student that's currently being enrolled at the school, we're having to redirect them over to Palermo because of the lack of capacity at the facility. As part of this boundary review, that's something we want to rectify as quickly as possible. Falgarwood is the second holding school that we were discussing earlier. This area here is holding all of the new growth east of Trafalgar, so that's going to be the future Oakville number 3, it's somewhat where the Oakville number 3 school is located. And again, we're anticipated that school to surpass its maximum capacity in 2025. Forest Trail is one of our single track FI schools that's located south of Dundas. Right now, this is a school that has quite a bit of pupil capacity available to it. It's currently at around 70% utilization. So there's definitely an opportunity here to accommodate more students. Munns, which is an area that is holding the FI students of North Oakville, specifically east of Trafalgar. Right now, even with being a holding school, it's doing quite well in managing that growth and is staying just around full capacity or just slightly above it over the long term in the current situation. Udinawi is located between Neagawa and Trafalgar, and this is a facility that is still has a number of portables on site, but as the community is aging, the peak enrollment is starting to go down a little bit. So now we're seeing a little bit of a decline. So we have an opportunity here to maybe bring back portions of the neighborhood that's a lot more proximate to the school. Palermo is a school that's located west of Bronte. And this is a school that has seen quite a drastic drop in enrollment over the last few years and will continue to see drops. This is a dual track school with both English and French immersion. There is some growth anticipated down the road as Palermo Village is developed, but overall it is a school that's well below utilization. Post Corners is another one of our high growth and areas of concern that we need to address as part of this boundary review. So already as of last year, the school had reached its max capacity, which triggered the need for a redirection, which is still in place. And it's anticipated to stay above or near its max capacity for the foreseeable future. So this is definitely one that we want to take away some of the pressures and resolve that issue so that they have enough room to adequately operate the school. River Oaks is another holding school that's becoming an increasing concern as it's holding the vast majority of the growth that's east of the vast majority of existing students east of Trafalgar as well as north of Burnhamthorpe area. We're anticipating that as of next year, the school will surpass its maximum portable capacity. So we're going to need to resolve this as part of the new boundaries that we're developing as part of this review. And last but not least, we have Sunningdale, which is a single-track FI school south of Dundas as well. And in this case, too, overall, the school is operating quite well, over 80% utilization. But there is some opportunity to maybe take on some additional growth to bring it up to 100% and take some pressures off other schools within the area. So with that, we're going to move into our first option, which is option number 7. What I will say, just to preface this, is that options 7, 8, 9 are quite comparable in many fronts. So what I'll do is I'll go through option 7 in full detail for all the schools, again, much like we did for the current boundaries. And then for options 8 and 9, we'll just focus in on the schools that are different from option 7, just so that we can get to the questions a little bit sooner. So in terms of the overall boundaries, we're going to zoom in on these areas as well, just so you have a better view of what's happening. What we're doing is we're trying to take all of the holding schools, assign them to the new schools, Oakville number 3 and Oakville 5, and redistribute some of the areas so that we can take advantage of some of the underutilization at certain schools and take away some pressures that we're currently seeing at our high growth schools. F5 similarly here. I will say in all three of the options we're going to present tonight, and we'll get into more details as to why, but we have removed F5 from North Oakville, and one of the key factors in this in all three options is that F5 has contributed to the accelerated growth of a lot of our school facilities, in that we're capturing more students from outside of the English track boundary. So because of that challenge, for now, until the accelerated growth pressures of a high growth area such as North Oakville has settled down a little bit more, we're going to take advantage of our capacity that's available south of Dundas, namely in the Palermo, Forest Trail, Sunningdale, and Munn schools, and take advantage of that to deal with the growth pressures of North Oakville. So in this scenario here, we'll zoom in on these details later, is we'll be redirecting the Dr. David R's, the current existing community of Dr. David R's FI catchments over to Forest Trail. And then the holding area that's in these zones over here, we'll be sending that over to Sunningdale just to redistribute growth and make sure that we're avoiding having to do more boundary reviews in this area in the near future. So now we're just going to hone in a little bit more into further details on each one of these affected areas that you saw delineated in those dotted lines. The first zone we'll be reviewing right now is the establishment of the Oakville number 3 boundary. So when the school is anticipated to open in September of 2025, the intent is that we would be allocating zones Q and zones T. Zone Q is currently coming from River Oaks, and zone T is currently coming from Falgarwood, and we would establish that as the Oakville number 3 English track boundary. The remaining zones that you see in and around will remain at Falgarwood until such a time Oakville number 4, which is located in zone R here, through my cursor, is open, at which point I do want to just provide notice to the community that we do anticipate, given the proximity of the school to zones Q, X, Y, and Z, we do anticipate that this may be a good boundary for Oakville number 4 in the future. So we just want to give everyone advance notice that there's a high likelihood that when that school opens close to 2030, there may be another boundary review, but that's at least far enough out where that community might already have graduated. But again, we just want to give notice so people are aware that this may happen. In terms of the establishment of the Oakville number 5 catchment area, it's going to be comprised of zones C, D, F, E, I, J, K, O, and P. Zones I and J were formerly from Dr. David R. Williams, but they have not been developed as of yet, so there are no existing students. Zones E and O, however, are currently attending River Oaks at the moment, and they do have existing students. So once Oakville number 5 opens, those students will be redirected to Oakville number 5. And the remaining areas I mentioned earlier, those are planned for growth, but there are no current students living in those areas. In terms of the French immersion boundaries, just to hone in a little bit more in more details here, It's anticipated that the former Dr. David R. Williams F5 boundary, which was comprised of zones HG, H, L, and M, which was part of the English track boundary for Dr. David R. Williams, will be going to forest trails. And then zone G, which was the Udinawi boundary that was going to Dr. David R. Williams for FI, will now be going to forest trails. Zones I and J, for that area specifically, we will be redirecting to Sunningdale once they become developed, which again, there are no current students in this area. Now, zooming into south of Dundas area, specifically in the zones for River Oaks and Post Corners. In terms of change to this boundary, what we'll be doing is, because River Oaks, we're taking a number of its boundaries away, that we're holding students for Oakville number 3, as well as some areas for Oakville number 5. Once we take away those students, River Oaks' overall enrollment population dwindles quite substantially to, the 60-50% range long term. So we need to address that by, uplifting its utilization, but also addressing the issue that we're having at Post Corners, which is the overutilization issues there. So here we're proposing to redirect zones AI and AH North, which is comprised of a lot of the high density growth within the area, to River Oaks. In this instance here, this is specifically for Zone B, which is near the hospital area, just along Dundas Street. So in this area here, this is currently going to River Oaks, and our plan is that as of next year, this zone would be redirected to Palermo to assist in uplifting its numbers and also giving it a more proximate school than going all the way to River Oaks. It's planned that this boundary here would remain at Palermo. We don't intend to change this boundary in the foreseeable future. With regards to Udinawi, as I mentioned earlier, Udinawi, although it still has portables, does have an opportunity to start capturing more of its immediate neighborhood, which is Zone H here. Currently, that zone is going to Dr. David R. Williams and is being bussed. So there is an opportunity to start phasing in Zone H into Udinawi, which is within the walking distance. So that's more of it's part of its walkable community. And then with regards to this high density area here depicted as zones X, Y, and Z, those students are currently, there's just over a dozen students that are currently attending in that boundary, and they're currently going to River Oaks. As part of this review, we would then send them to Falgarwood to continue holding there until such a time Oakville number 4 would open in 2030. But they would have the ability to remain there for at least a good 7 years before they would be impacted. So it's still a stable boundary for the long term. And then lastly, as part of this option here, zones F, D, C, and B, which were part of the River Oaks area, the Sunningdale area for FI. We would be redirecting that over to Palermo to assist it with its overall utilization as well and take advantage of a more proximate location. In terms of enrollment projections, for Oakville number 3, with the boundary that we established for it, so albeit it may seem like a small area, it is capturing the existing community and the one that's being built out more immediately. But what we are assured here is that it will be a sustainable long-term boundary, and that we're not going to reach our maximum, or we're not going to surpass the maximum portable capacity. And we do have time to open Oakville number 4. So as we see that pressure increase, we'll have an outlet to maybe redirect more students, or maybe even bring in more students depending where we land at a later time, but not impacting the core students. In terms of the Oakville number 5 boundary, in this case here, once we open the facility in 2026, we will see a gradual increase over time. Within 5 years, it will surpass its built capacity, but it won't hit its maximum capacity till well into 2033, at which point we'll be ready with our Oakville number 6 school to alleviate that pressure. Dr. David R. Williams in option 7, we are successful in attenuating that huge pressure that we're seeing where there was a need for all 24 portables. So by redirecting the French Merton program as well as parts of the English track boundary, we're successful in bringing down overall portables below 12. And then over time, as growth continues within its smaller boundary, the school will fluctuate, between 12 portables long-term, dropping down as low as 5. But that gives it room for maybe a little bit more students to maybe stay if we move FI or if they choose to not go to Forest Trails. So we have some ability here to navigate the future enrollment needs of the school. With Falgarwood, once we open Oakville number 3 in 2025, it'll take away a lot of its immediate pressure and will allow the remaining community which it's holding to grow out. And then by the time we hit 2030, that's when it's expected to hit its maximum or surpass its maximum capacity, which we can respond with the opening of Oakville number 4. Afterwards, Forest Trail, as you recall, we had quite a substantial amount of empty space available at the school to be utilized. So now with the redirection of the French immersion program from Dr. David R. Williams over to Forest Trail, we do go over the built capacity of the school, but long term, as that enrollment stabilizes, the facility will be within 5 or less portables, which is addressing one of the major concerns we had in North Oakville with pressures at Dr. David R. Williams generated by the FI program. For the MUNS boundary, we've left it unchanged. So what MUNS is currently holding east of Trafalgar will continue to hold that. It's showing that right now it's able to hold current FI students. So we'll continue with that path forward. And we have quite a bit of room to grow to if we do see a higher participation rate in FI for the long term. Udinawi, with the introduction of Zone H, we do see enrollment grow quite substantially. We don't reach max portable capacity. And as, again, the community ages out, it will start declining back down to below 12 portables long term. Palermo, with the introduction of additional zones and some growth areas, we do see the school eventually grow to its built capacity and have a better overall utilization. Post Corners, with the opening of Oakville number 3, what that does is that it frees up a lot of space at River Oaks, so then we're able to implement the boundary in 2025. And in redirecting a number of students from it to River Oaks, we take away a lot of the pressures of the school, so it goes well below its max portable capacity. And as that community ages out a little bit, then the school will be at around 100% utilization within that 10-year period. On the other side, we have River Oaks right now, where right now, as soon as we hit 2024, we're able to move Zone B. So that brings us below that max capacity that we were going to see in the current situation. And then with the subsequent openings of Oakville number 3 and Oakville number 5, we see a lot of its pressure go down, but it's also receiving a number of students from, from Post Corners to bring it up to its built capacity. And long term, the school will be operating in the high to low 90s, which is a good place to be. Afterwards, we have Sunningdale, which will be accommodating additional growth specifically from the Oakville number 5 area. So over time, it will be hitting its or nearing its built capacity, not requiring any portables. And managing the growth in the north. So now moving on to option 8, what I can say again is that option 8 is very similar to option 7. All of the other zones that we discussed for the other schools remain effectively the same. The one variation that we've seen here and a lot of the iterations that we went through with our boundary review committee was what was happening between River Oaks and Post Corners. In terms of the FI boundary, again, that remains unchanged. So even with the changes between the English track program with Post Corners and River Oaks, they all still remain at Sunningdale, so there's no impact there. So just zooming a little bit more, in this scenario here, what we're doing is we're now redirecting zones AE and AJ, as well as AH North, which is the high density area just southwest of Trafalgar and Dundas, over to River Oaks, and then Post Corners will retain zones AF, AI, and AH South. In terms of enrollment projections, they're pretty close to what we saw in option 7, but a little bit more pressure at Post Corners. So Immediately after Oakville 3 opens, and then we're able to take away the holding from River Oaks, we're able to redirect a number of students. As students age out, we expect that we'll start with 5 portables on the year of implementation 2025, and then long term we'll probably be at 1 or 2 portables within a 10-year period. As for River Oaks in this scenario here, again, right off the cuff, when we're moving Zone B, we're going to get out of that danger zone with a max portable capacity in 2024. And long term, with the additional students from Post Corners, the school will be operating within the mid to high 80s long term. And last but not least, we have option 9. So this option here is one where we're looking to try to minimize impacts to students as much as possible, while also maximizing walkability to school. So again, we're just looking at a different version of how we're addressing the zones between Post Corner and River Oaks. FI again remains unchanged. So in this situation here, we're just moving zones AJ and AH north from Post Corners over to River Oaks. And in terms of enrollment projections on this front, because we're moving fewer students, the amount of students that we're removing from Post Corners are fewer. So therefore, we still see Post Corners long term operating between 130 all the way down to 120% long term. So we'll have portables on site for the long run. And then River Oaks, in contrast, because it's receiving less students, obviously it's going to have less effective utilization. Long term, we're going to be initially in the high 80s, but we'll drop down all the way into the low 70s over a 10-year period. So there's still some opportunity here for additional growth, but the school isn't as well utilized. But we're minimizing impacts to students. Apologies for my voice, everyone. All right, so moving on to part 2. This is where we'll open it up to the floor. So in terms of the format for this evening for questions and feedback, there are a number of parent representatives that have, parents that, or community members that have submitted their questions in advance. So we'll start with responding to those this evening. For those of you that haven't had a chance or haven't had a chance to submit your questions, if you click on that or use your phone or your device on the leftmost QR code entitled questions, that'll bring you to the question form, which I'll present to you in a second. That way you can submit your questions, and then you can submit multiple questions this evening. If you're still unsure as to how you're impacted in all this process, you can also access the second QR code, and by inputting your address, it'll be able to tell you in what zone you fall within. And so that way you can comment accordingly on each one of the options. And last but not least, the last QR code is where you'll be able to find the feedback portal, which is where you can submit your feedback after this meeting and once you've had time to review all the options. So in terms of using the application for how you're affected, again, you can use that QR code. The first prompt will be just to enter your address. Afterwards, what it'll do, it'll pop up what zone you fall into, as well as how you're impacting each one of the boundaries, whether it's in the English track or the FI boundaries. All right. So at this point, I'm going to open up the question forum and we'll start taking some questions. Claire, Jonathan, you want to take the first one? On line number 6.
Sure. So I believe that is what steps is the board taking to ensure students who have moved from their current address to an area that falls outside the boundary of their current school are not allowed to attend the school? This sort of situation is not unique to scenarios involving revised school boundaries. Families moving out of a school catchment area is commonplace in all of our schools. Office staff and administration have processes in place to review and verify student information each year. And of course, if a school is designated open to out-of-area students, this is not an issue. Anyone's welcome to attend that school. But if a school is designated as closed, families will be asked to register their children at the school corresponding to their new address, although there is an appeal process if they'd like to pursue that.
Thanks, Jonathan. I'm going to take one of the first questions that we received. So this one's with regards to the redirection from post corners. So we did have a few parent or community members ask why we had our new move-ins were required to move to Palermo instead of attending their area school, which was at Post Corners, which would also be applicable to Dr. David R. Williams. So in terms of what happened with that process is that last year, after we were going through the registration process, what we realized is that both Post Corners and Dr. David R. Williams were about to hit their maximum portable capacity, at which point we could no longer accommodate students effectively. So all the classrooms were maxed out in terms of their the space that they had. So in order to continue providing student accommodation and an option for students that were moving into the area to continue attending school, what we implemented was a temporary redirection, which is where we've taken everyone and we've been sending them over to Palermo, which had the most room available for the long run. And the intent is that once the Oakville number 3 and Oakville number 5 facilities open, then we'll be able to reassess that redirection and hopefully remove it entirely, so then people can start or continue going to their neighborhood schools. The next question is with relations to the portables at Dr. David R. Williams. It was noted by some community members that there are a number of portables present at Dr. David R. Williams, 24 at the moment, and that's definitely hindering a lot of the play space available on site. We do acknowledge that this is that's something that's not ideal for our schools. Typically, we wouldn't want to have more than 18 portables at an elementary school site, but this is more of a balancing act in terms of interests. By adding up to 24 portables on site, what we're trying to do is delay the need to do a redirection in this area as long as possible, in anticipation that hopefully we could open Oakville 3 without having to do the redirection. As it stands, that wasn't the reality. And yes, there are 24 portables on site in the interim. Our intent is to reduce that down to 18 for the maximum in the long term, just because we know it's not ideal. And again, as part of this process, we're trying to reduce the number of portables at Dr. David R. So ideally, it'll be below 12 in all the options. So it's something that we know is an issue at the moment, and we hope to resolve as part of this process. Another question that we received from a few community members that submitted questions was why there was no consideration for an FI school in North Oakville. I would say that we looked at this one long and hard, and what we realized, especially in these high growth areas such as North Oakville, and we've seen it in Milton as well, is that when we're incorporating a French immersion program in a high growth area, what we seem to be doing is every time we open a school, we're moving that French immersion program to the new school. And what that does is, on the first is it creates a little bit of instability for that community because it's constantly shifting. But what it's also doing, what we saw at Dr. David R. specifically, is that now you're essentially capturing students from two different student areas because you're capturing from Udinawi as well as Dr. David R. Williams. But those additional students coming from Udinawi accelerates the growth of that school to the extent that it reaches its max capacity sooner, and we're not always able to respond with a new school as quickly as we'd like. So as a result of that, that's where we end up with 24 portables on site or more redirections or having to do more frequent boundary reviews. So the intent as part of this review is acknowledging the reality of French immersion and the impacts it has and accelerating growth is we'll wait till the majority of North Oakville is built, enrollment has stabilized, and ideally once we get to reviewing the boundaries for Oakville number 4, or closer to that, or we see an opportunity that there is space to accommodate, we'll reassess the situation to see if we can provide FI in the north. But until that time, we just want to make sure we're providing stable boundaries for both our English and our FI programs, and also maximizing the use of empty classrooms south of Dundas too, where there's an opportunity to take advantage of our single track schools. The next question is whether or not the boundary review will impact existing students. So the answer to that is that yes, it will impact students that are currently attending their schools. Jonathan had touched on this a little bit, but we're going to have to move students from one school to the next because we have to address these accommodation issues we're currently having to take away some of the pressure that we're having, as well as populating our new schools. So as part of the process is once boundaries are defined, we'll make sure that we're doing the best we can to ease the transition and provide the best student experience possible. And again, as part of this process, one of the main things that we really wanted to do is provide stable long-term boundaries so we're not having to do this again anytime soon. There was one question too that was with regards to Zone B, and we spoke to it a little bit earlier, but the question is really like to try, or where are we trying to avoid having one zone move from one school to the next and back to another school. So in this case, it was with relation to Zone B. The intent for Zone B is to remain at Palermo for the foreseeable future. So we don't intend to go back and forth. And again, the purpose of this boundary review process was to make sure that once we make this change, the only trigger which would force us to go back, ideally, to doing another change is the opening of a new school. And where we do know that areas are going to be holding in anticipation of that new school, to make sure that communities are well aware of that, so that if they're moving into an area, they know they're holding and they will have a boundary review process. Another question came in about, what notice is provided to new homeowners that were moving into an area, specifically with condominiums. What I can say is that we treat condominium move-ins the same way we do with a new subdivision. So we do require developers to post a sign on their in and around their condominium to advise parents that they may not be moving. If they move into this area, they may not be going to the local school. We also provide this notice within the warning clause of all agreements of purchase and sales for new purchases in North Oakville, so they're aware of it as well. So it's something that we try to advise as much as we can. And we do provide this information to our development community members too, just so that they can relay that information in the sales centers. I'll pass over the next question over to Claire and Jonathan.
So we have a question about school transitions and how they can cause increased stress, low self-esteem, decrease in academic performance, and social difficulties. So the question asks, what supports will you provide to these students? And if the move happens, how will you monitor the impact on their mental health? So we understand and appreciate that any move, any transition can be difficult for students. While it might represent an exciting fresh start and the prospect for new friends and teachers for some kids, it can be enormously stressful and challenging for others. Every school has in place supports for the mental, social, and academic well-being of every child, and we believe warmly embraces students who are new to their school community for any reason. So community circles, buddy systems, frequent check-ins, transition committee that's in place in every one of these scenarios, support for students with special needs. These are just a few of the many strategies adopted by educators to ensure that students who are new to the school fit right in and quickly feel a sense of welcome and belonging. And we need to remember there will be lots of new students in these scenarios, not just one or two. So they'll automatically have things in common. And we always have all sorts of new students in our schools for a variety of reasons. They may be moving from another Halton District School Board school. They may be coming from the Catholic Board, a private school, or from homeschooling. Or they may be coming into Halton from another part of Ontario or Canada, or perhaps joining us from another country. So there's lots of support for these kids in their schools, and they'll be warmly welcomed.
Thank you, Jonathan. There's a question about, the relocation to the FI program from Dr. David R. Williams to Forest Trail, and, the lost opportunity that now they won't be able to walk to school in that area. That's definitely acknowledged as part of this, and that's one of the things we were, challenged with weighing in terms of balancing enrollment, providing that walkable neighborhood, and stable long-term boundaries. So, we do acknowledge that this changes it a little bit in that we have certain cohorts of the FI community at Dr. David R. Williams, which will no longer have the ability to do a walk-to-school area. But this is also something that's being impacted from the English program side as well, where there's students that, we're historically walking, and now because we're having to deal with the pressures and trying to balance all of these varying needs, they will also be, having to use the bus to get to school. So to the best of our abilities, we try to maximize that walkability and trying to weigh all of them together and reaching the best possible outcome. In a similar vein here, the question came up of, have we accounted for the fact that if FI students decide to no longer continue in the program because they now have to be bused to another location, will that just increase the numbers at Dr. David R. Williams, for instance? So the answer to that is that yes, it was considered. And that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure there is a little bit of a buffer for, parental decisions to change programs at Dr. David R. Williams. So we're not really at that cusp of max enrollment, as well as for any new students that is entering into grade 2 from Dr. David R. Williams, acknowledging that Forest Trail is a more distant school. We have reduced the apportionment that we're expecting at Forest Trail. So that way, it's about half of the students we expect to go. So it is something that's been accounted for in the numbers for reduced participation in the FI program due to distance. There was one question with regards to Sunningdale and how they would be impacted, as well as Montclair. And what I'd say is that Sunningdale really is just is a recipient of growth. Their existing students, I don't believe, will be impacted as part of this move for Sunningdale in the FI program. Yep, just confirm. So, yeah, there is no impact to Sunningdale students. Another question with regards to school registrations families that may have students that are currently in one of our existing facilities and kids that are coming in for junior kindergarten, what to do. Registrations will be open in early January, so that will be ahead of a decision being made. We'll be providing the initial staff report to the community on January 10th, which will present the preferred option that's going to be considered by trustees. So that'll give you a good indication of what to maybe expect. Again, that's not the final decision. That'll be on January 24th, at which point we will notify the community through Sinner Mail of what was approved by trustees. But in any regard, I would still register now to your home school just to get in the queue. And just keep an ear out and an eye out for future communications from the board after those key dates, so that you're just aware of what changes may come into play. School administrations will also be aware of these potential changes too, so they can certainly assist you with that information. Another question was with regards to why we're not just prioritizing new students moving in to be relocated to alternative facilities. Typically what we want to do is definitely establish boundaries for these areas so that we don't have a duplication of zones or, students that are in the same area attending two different schools that are in the same grade. So for the most part, we try to avoid that. Safe and acceptance situations where we're having to do student redirections because we reached that max capacity. So really, as part of this process, what we're doing is trying to establish good long-term boundaries, so that we're avoiding redirections and making sure that students that are living within proximity to one another at their homes will be going to the same schools as well. So that's why we're not trying to differentiate between the two. There's a question that came up with regards to legacy exemption and, how much consideration is given to that. So as part of a lot of these options, and, something I should have mentioned, is a lot of these, we are going to be providing legacy exemptions for grades 6s to 8 on the year of implementation, specifically in the Post Corner River Oaks area, as well as the Dr. David R. William FI program going to Forest Trail. That's certainly something that our parent committee has expressed as being something that's quite of interest for our community members, and it's something that we're continuing to look at. So as we receive more feedback with regards to legacy exemptions, or as some noted as grandparenting, that's definitely going to be a topic of conversation at our next meeting, which is going to be next Thursday after we review all the feedback with our boundary review committee members. The next question is with regards to busing. Andrew, I'm just going to narrate this one if you can cue in and just answer it. It's how do I know where the school bus stops are going to be located for the school year I'm impacted?
Sure. We don't predetermine the stop locations yet, so once the option is chosen, then we'll start looking at our summer planning session. When we do finish our planning session, we do have a preview period in July, so parents can check their locations then. It will open up permanently on our parent portal 2 weeks before school. Again, bus stop placements are within 800 meters of your home. That's the policy, but in practice, they're generally 400 meters to 200 meters from your home, so you can be assured that your home is probably pretty close to the bus stop. Again, all this information is available on our Halton Bus website at www.haltonbus.ca.
Thanks, Andrew. There was a question just clarifying when Oakville number 3 is going to be open. And if students that are enrolling for the first time in the JK will also be moved or remain at their existing school. So the school is anticipated for September 2025. Initially, we were hoping September 2024, but we were faced with a pretty bad delay with our constructors, so we had to push it back a year. So any student that's enrolling for next year in junior kindergarten at one of the holding schools, probably either River Oaks or Falgarwood, yes, they would attend that school, and then they would move over to Oakville number 3 the following year. Another question came in with regards to one of the zones, specifically AJ, and why it's being considered as being moved from Post Corners over the River Oaks, being that it's more walkable to Post Corners. So this is definitely a challenging one that when we were looking at it. When we were looking at the overall the walking web for AJ in particular, as well as all the other zones, AJ specifically is one that it was walkable for both River Oaks as well as Post Corners equally. Distance wise, they were also very comparable. We do acknowledge that the community does use that overpass, which does shorten the distance. But again, even with that shortened distance, it's still comparable to River Oaks. So, that's another one that's challenging in terms of weighing the long-term balance of enrollment and walkability. And because of that interchangeability of walking opportunity between River Oaks and Post Corners, that's why it did show up in some of the options, while still acknowledging that it may be better to walk one way or another. But that's the rationale behind why that zone specifically was looked at both ways. There's a question with regards to legacy exemptions in Zone H that are currently designated for Udinawi, and whether more students can be legacy exempt. We hear that that's definitely something we can be looking at. It'll be part of the discussions we have with our boundary review committee at the next meeting. Again, we acknowledge the big thing we have to look at is let's establish a good base of boundaries that'll be good for the long term of the community. And then we can see how much legacy exemption we can allocate based on those numbers, making sure that we're not keeping too many, causing issues, while maybe not looking at opportunities for legacy exemption. So it's well noted. Question with regards to the redirection that's currently in place for post corners to Palermo and as well as Dr. David R. Williams. The redirections, the way that they're currently designed is there's a few criteria as to when they will either be suspended or removed entirely. In these particular cases, we're reviewing our redirected areas on an annual basis. If there's an opportunity to bring students back, we use a first out, first in approach. So the first ones to be redirected. If we have the space, we'll try to bring them back to their community. And if we're seeing that there's no longer a need for it, then maybe we'll suspend it for the year. And lastly, once we open the facilities, it is the intent to remove the redirection because then the school's capacity will be freed up quite substantially and we'll be able to accommodate students moving in. Another question is with regards to option 7, how long River Oaks is going to be a holding school. So really, River Oaks, for the most part, once Oakville number 3 opens, a lot of its holding boundaries will be removed entirely. So at that point, that frees up quite a bit of capacity of the school, bringing it well below its built capacity. So that's why, and it's also pointed out that are we just providing more issues to River Oaks? That's why we're carefully balancing that whatever we're bringing in from from post corners over to River Oaks, is still keeping it within its built capacity. We're not just creating another situation where we're providing too much pressure at a specific school. So for option 8, there's just a question on how developments in zone AI that haven't been built yet will be accommodated. So as part of that, we didn't get into it too much tonight so far, but when we develop our enrollment projections for each one of these zones, what we do is that we look at all of the units that are planned within those specific zones. And we provide a what we call a development yield on how many students we anticipate to be generated by those areas. So in short, or in summary, we have accounted for the new growth within AI. So the projections do take into consideration all the new movements we'll see as that gets built out. And that's the same for all the other zones that, currently may not seem like there's any growth there. But if it's coming down the way, it's all been incorporated in our projections. Lorene, do you have can you look at question number 33? On line 33.
Sorry, I'm just reading it over and trying to make sure I understand the question. Just give me one moment.
Yeah, okay, I get it. Similarly to the last question we answered in terms of zone AI and whether or not we've accounted for new growth, that's part of it as well for AH North. In that question, how we're accounting for growth and is it incorporated in the numbers and are we ensuring that they're going to be long-term stable boundaries? The answer is yes, that's our intent, and we're reviewing all of the new development units that are planned for that. Maybe if I'm just to further the last answer I gave, the municipality does circulate us all development applications, and that's what we use to predict the number of units within those areas so we can figure out how many students there are. So as we're developing these boundaries, again, it accounts for new growth. Next question is, if I remove my child from FI, then my child should be able to remain at their current school. In this case, if the zone that they're within, for instance, is a dual track school, and you remove them from FI and they land in the English boundary, and that English boundary is what we're proposing, then yes, they will be able to remain at that school. So the next question is in the FI portion of the boundary review. We're only seeing Forest Trail having portables, more substantial number of portables over the next few years, whereas Munns and Sunningdales and Palermo don't have as many portables, and if there's an opportunity for redistribution. So one of the key pieces on this is that some of the options we did look at, redirecting it to other facilities and even splitting that zone into two different areas. And one of the things that our boundary review parent committee wanted us to look at is, could we not keep those cohorts together so that those classrooms could move all together to Forest Trail as opposed to being separated between Forest Trail and Sunningdale, for instance. So in doing that, we do increase the pressure at Forest Trail. But at least we're trying to, keep those cohorts together and maximize student experience. So again, that's one of those situations where, we can't have every criteria perfect, but at least here we're balancing one where we're giving more weight to student experience, which comes at the cost of more portables on site for Forest Trail. And then we have questions with considerations made for students impacted by the need to find new before and after school care. So that's something that's certainly come up quite a few times with our boundary review committee, as well as something we've reached out to our before and after coordinator at the board. One of the things we do as part of our process with this is we keep into constant communication with our providers. In this case here, for the most part, it's Oakville YMCA that is housed within our own schools. We unfortunately don't have as much rapport with our private providers. But what I can say is we do disseminate this information, and we have disseminated these preferred options over to our coordinator, which I provided to YMCA, so they can start planning for the potential changes and needs for before and after care between the school facilities. One of the big things is, making sure that whether or not they'll have the ability to increase the capacity in those areas. One of the concerns we do have is with JKSKs, in that they're a little bit more capped now with the subsidized childcare for those areas. And that we're not able to increase those caps at the present time. However, those caps don't exist for your grade 1s to grade 8s or your school age children. So the providers will have the ability to staff accordingly and add more capacity to those schools and hopefully reduce those wait lists. And a lot of times when they do this process, they strive to prioritize to the best of their abilities the existing families that are currently in their system and try to accommodate them at the new schools. So it is top of mind and is something that we're consistently communicating to before and after care, and something that we want to, communicate out as soon as we have more details on it. There's a question with whether it's our plan to move Zone H to Oakville number 5 after it opens. And if you recall, Zone H is the one that's just at the north end of Udinawi, closest to that preserve natural heritage area. No, our intent is to leave that at Udinawi. And the reason for that is that it's within that walking distance, and it makes a good neighborhood scale boundary, which is something that we strive for where possible. The next question is, what kind of support will schools have for children who have never taken school buses, and how long will the support be available? Andrew, can I pass that one over to you, please?
Yeah, sure. So we do have a first-time rider program for students that have never taken a bus before. This is run in the summer, so what happens is they take a bus to a school, teach the kids about bus safety, get them comfortable getting on and off the bus. So you can register for that. Again, if you're new to busing, I would highly recommend you check out our website at haltonbus.ca. We also have programs in the school safe rider programs where the company comes to talk about bus safety with all the students every year. So that's kind of a reminder to all students about the bus safety issues. Aside from that, just chatting with your bus driver, they will know everything they need to know about safety. So if you are nervous, just your bus driver is your best friend. So, and if you have any questions, again, you can reach out to us at transportation@haltonbus.ca.
Thanks, Andrew. A question came up with regards to legacy exemption and, if there's a younger sibling that's also attending the school, how that will be treated. So again, this is one that's come up. So I think that's going to be part of the considerations as we're working through with our boundary review committee next week and reviewing the feedback on how we can implement this and discuss it. But again, we really want to make sure that we're establishing a good base boundary first and foremost for that long-term stability. And we'll see what kind of concessions we can make to look at the siblings component as well. Claire, Jonathan, anything to add on that one, or okay?
The next question is about staffing and staffing for our administrators, our teachers, our educational assistants. Our special education is all based on number of students in a school. So the question is, will the staff follow the students? If we need fewer staff at a school because the population has gone down, the student population, then there is a possibility of some of the staff following the students over. We definitely take a look at that when it comes to the administration. And with all pockets of staff, we have staffing plans that we follow as far as timelines and hiring, but it's something we take into consideration everywhere we can because we know that's a really supportive piece for the students.
Thanks, Claire. Next question is, based on previous experiences, once a BRC makes the recommendation on the preferred option, how often is it overruled, changed in the final approval process? Has it ever happened? And if so, what would be the rationale? So typically as part of this, the boundary review committee can recommend an option or a couple options that they prefer. So we've often seen it where it's one or two. As well as maybe some additional caveats or changes that resulted from the discussions we had from this public information meeting and reviewing the feedback. And is there, once that happens, what occurs is that is brought to the BRSC, which then brings that forward to the senior administrative team of the board, which includes the director of education. That's reviewed by that team, and then ultimately they will provide a recommended option to the Board of Trustees, which will have the final say on the approval. Has it ever been overruled or changed? I'd say, in my experience at this board, at least in previous board, it hasn't been drastically changed. But there might be some minor alterations or enhancements or improvements made to it. Whether it's something with phasing in certain components of it, it might be matters in and around legacy exemptions or siblings or things like that. Those are sometimes the discussions that happen around the tables, especially with our trustees that may hear additional information from the community. So it has changed, but I don't think I've ever seen it, or I don't think in the experience of other members here, if they want to speak to it, that it's drastically changed from what was provided by the committee. If it were to occur, it's if the committee came up with something that just doesn't meet the intent of the review. But what I can say is the work that's been done by the parent reps in this instance here has really followed along with what the key principles and what the objectives were of this review. So I think we're well on track. All right, Claire. On question 62.
Thanks, Fred. Question is, will there be staff available in the schools to direct the students? Absolutely. That's something that we do as a regular practice, but having the students welcomed into the school happens well before that school year will even start. Practice has been, because we've done this a few times before, it's messy, but it has to happen. We start those transition processes, Jonathan mentioned, well in advance of the school year starting. So there will be students that are leadership students from the school that will be collecting new students that will go over to the previous school, that will meet some of the kids there. The staff will be doing that. There'll be assemblies and presentations. They'll be asking them questions about what they'd like to bring over. Examples like, hey, we have a certain team or something along the lines at our school. Can we bring that over? Will there be a teacher that can supervise that? Letting them ask as many questions as they possibly want to ask before they get there is really important to start that communication process and calming the students well before. So by the time they get to their new school, not only will there be teachers there letting them know where their school's going to be or their classroom's going to be, but they'll have shirts on, they'll have welcoming posters, the kids will possibly have even visited the school a couple of times and already been able to see where most of the classrooms are, the gym, the library, and things like that.
All right, so just cognizant of the time there, we're going to take the last, I think we've got 2 or 3 questions left here, and then we'll move on to next steps. And again, if you continue to have questions or if they weren't addressed tonight, you can also submit them through feedback, and we'll, submit them through the dedicated bound review email. All right, so the next one is exceptions that can be made for siblings starting kindergarten at post corners. Given the current redirection. So for post corners redirection, again, part of the process is first and foremost, like we do not want to have a year where there are no JKs that are entering the school. So what I would encourage you to do is go register now, in January when the registration's open for post corners. And what the process is with redirection is that we're going to continue monitoring it. And once it gets to the point where it reaches the cap, that's when we'll shut it down again and advise communities that we're full up there. So there's still an opportunity for new students entering into post corners to apply. Last 2 questions here. Some considerations around transportation for legacy exemptions. So that's one we're gonna take back to the bound review committee and discuss further. I think that's one we're gonna look at on a case by case basis. We're not gonna apply it unilaterally to all. But again, we're going to review it. So, we do understand that some of these changes, there is a substantial distance being added. So we need to, just look at it on each one of the impacted areas and see what could be done to accommodate while trying to balancing resources as best we can. And then last but certainly not least, questions come up about the status of the Northeast Oakville #1 high school, and I guess the not only the opening, but the process around that and determining the boundaries and what those could be. So what I'll say is that we're targeting September 2027 for the opening of that facility. We're quite active in getting the site prepared for the development of the school. The school is funded, and it's one that we've been pushing quite aggressively and getting it done as soon as possible. In terms of the boundary review process for that one particularly, we would expect to start it probably 2 years prior to 2027, just to give everyone ample time to know where they'll be going. But when that process starts, we will provide due notification to the entire community that we expect to impact and go from there. So expect that in the next couple of years. All right, so with that, that concludes our Q&A portion of tonight's public information meeting. And again, I do want to thank all the attendees and those that submitted their questions in advance. and just forwarding this conversation and informing how we're going to be moving this along in the coming weeks. So in terms of next steps, so again, as you noted, there was the feedback, or sorry, the QR code for the feedback portal. The feedback portal has been open for about a week now, and it will continue to be open all the way till noon on Monday. So the intent right now is to go through the feedback survey, review the options, which are all posted online in greater detail than we provided tonight. So you can see the by program projections for each one of the schools and their utilization, so you can have a better idea of how that's looking like, as well as all the mapping. Once that's submitted, this will be collected and provided to our boundary review committee, which will be reviewing that feedback, and that's where that committee will be coming together and essentially coming up with their recommended option or options to the BRSC, which again, as I mentioned earlier, will then review that and bring it forward to the administrative team at the board, which is comprised of all SOs and the Director of Education, and then that'll go to the Board of Trustees for consideration approval in January. In terms of the resources, it's all available online on the board website. So I won't go over that again, but one thing that it'll be quite useful, especially if you're uncertain as to how this impacts you, is the How Am I Affected app, which is one that we presented earlier. Again, just insert your address and it'll tell you exactly how this boundary review will impact you and what your designated school will be based on all three options. Oh, I already went through this. So again, we're going to present all this to our committee members next Thursday, and we'll present those and advance the process. Again, if you have any additional questions, by all means, please reach out to the dedicated email, oakville3and5@hdsb.ca, and we'll answer your questions as quickly as possible. When we do bring it forward to the board on, we'll first bring this report, or the recommended option will be brought forward to board on January 10th in the new year. That'll be the first time we present the recommended option to trustees for information. If you wish to delegate, you'll have an opportunity to do so, and we'll provide some of that additional information through Centermail on how you can delegate or when you can delegate and when the report will be available. We're also considering maybe the committee of the whole meeting to as an additional date. Eventually, January 24th will be when the final decision is made. And then once that decision is made, we'll be notifying the community soon after, so everyone's aware of what to expect as we're going through the registration process. So with that, again, I just want to thank all of our parent committee members that have gone through this process with us and have done the hard work and bring us to the point that we are now. It's been a substantially large boundary review process with a lot of information and a lot of good discussions and options that have been developed. I want to thank also the senior team in supporting us through this, our trustees that have joined us along in this process, as well as planning staff that have been getting all of this information, these tools, this data, and these options together so that we can present it to you this evening. So again, thanks everyone, and we thank you in advance for your feedback and participation in this process.